Welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Jim Rugg.
I'm Ed Piscor.
Going to look at Jim Woodring's Frank book here today, Ed. One of the stranger comics I've ever read. Pretty excited to revisit this and dive in. But speaking of strange comics, tell us about Red Room.
From Fantagraphics, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Red Room, issue 1, going to be coming out beginning in May 2021. This is the cover for issue number 1. You could pre-order it at the link tree in the description below. Tens of thousands of people have done so, man. Can we get it to 6 figures before the comic comes out? We'll see. Goosing those numbers are the variants that people are chasing for. So there are these retail incentive variants where a store orders 5 copies, I think. They could get access to scoop up the Eddie P variant. A dozen copies sold to a shop, they'll be able to scoop up the Jim Rugg 8-ball Dan Clowes variant. 20 copies gets them the Peach Momoko variant if they so choose to order it. A lot of people are chasing after that, and there are shops out there that have ordered 1,000 copies. When they do that sort of business, we got to draw them a fresh exclusive cover. But showing this one off from Third Eye Comics for the past couple of weeks, and other stores have been reaching out, man. So it's been a cover making week this past week, and we'll show those off when all of the typography is settled upon. But that's Third Eye Comics. What these stores are doing is they'll grab like the Peach one and put together bundles, and so that people can get their hands on for the completists out there. So look around online, look on eBay. You'll be able to find the covers that you want.
You can join me on patreon.com/JimRugg, where you can find some of my out-of-print mini comics and zines. I uploaded this for the March subscribers. Well, for any subscribers, but for the March offering. This is a catalog for a ballpoint pen art show that I had in LA. The catalog, of course, sold out very quickly. So if you want to get hold of this, the only way to do it is through the high-res digital copy that's available on my Patreon. I also post a lot of my original art process, write about what I do, how I do it, all of those things. So lots of content to be found on there. And follow me and join me on patreon.com/JimRugg. And I'll leave you with that 3D rendering using ballpoint pens. So patreon.com/JimRugg. We're here today, Ed, to look at Jim Woodring, subject of a documentary that you can stream online. But Jim Woodring, making comics since the 80s, at one point worked at Ruby Spears with Jack Kirby, which is kind of mind-blowing to me when I think of these two artists. Like, they're on very different ends of some spectrum.
Working on Turbo Team together.
Yes. Strange collaborator. But Woodring, one of the most interesting and unique cartoonists that I can think of. And Frank, probably his most unique sets of comics.
There are these cartoonists who come through the medium of comics. And we are so freaking lucky to have them make comic pages. And Jim Woodring is a guy that I put very high on that list because his kind of like artistic sensibility, you could look at it right there on that cover. If he wanted to kind of just go where the money's flowing, like he could have been just like the greatest kind of juxtapose era.
That's
like
exactly.
Robert Williams, kind of like Mark Ryden. Like it would be like Mark Ryden, eat your heart out. Because your stuff is like illustration, but our boy is coming from the soul with this shit here, man. And he could have gone that route, but guess what? He likes comics, and he applied his craft and ability to making comics, and we have a better medium for that.
Yeah, his level of craft is extraordinary, as hopefully these paintings of covers demonstrates. I am in love with these artists who have that kind of level of craft because it comes just from putting in the time.
You see evidence in the documentary that you mentioned. He has this bookshelf that's not dissimilar from the DVD-sized bookshelf that's over there, stage left to where we're recording, filled with those very tiny moleskins that are like 5-inch by that digest size kind of moleskins, filled with them, and he would just pull them off randomly and just like flick through it like it's the phone book or something, and just beautiful drawings on every page times 300 sketchbooks right there.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing. It's almost a guy who's has to do this, almost possessed of some kind of creative spirit and urges. So I flipped here. You're talking about his abilities and what he could be doing, and I think his painting is really amazing. This collection features both color work and black and white work. It's a really nice book, but he's equally fat. Like his ability is equal, whether it's doing pen and ink work or doing painting.
Absolutely, like these lines that he's able to get are just incredible. And once again, that's a thing on the documentary that you can see. And also, by the way, like monochromatic,
Yes.
What is that, pencil or charcoal or something?
Some kind of maybe a combination of the two, but yes, I mean they've released books of his artwork that is this graphite, charcoal, whatever it is. But yes, it's another good demonstration of his ability and that high level of craft to kind of really create anything that he conceives of.
Yeah.
And it's that super vivid imagination. You read his comics, they are something else. They're almost like alien transmissions or something. So, having that ability to virtually draw and work in any medium and deliver something at a high level really aids you whenever the stuff that is being drawn is coming out of a deep imagination. You're not photo referencing anything you see in this book.
No.
First drawing of Frank and first comic strip appearance of Frank. And it's kind of cool. He has some notes in the back talking about this character, where the character came from. And he wrote like 2 versions of this strip. And one was extremely vulgar language that he said he didn't even like writing it. And one is a little bit more linear, but wasn't happy with that one either. And then whenever he tried it without words, he said that kind of is, like that's the one that brought it together and made sense to him. And one of the quotes that describes this comic is, "It looks normal, but it isn't." And I love that quote, like after reading this, and I don't know if we'll do every page in here because it's a pretty big book.
Yeah, no.
But you can see your table of contents here. It's collected from various anthologies, from Frank Comics, from Jim Comics, and, put together here. This is 03. He's done a lot more Frank Comics since this was published, some standalone graphic novels and things. But this was my introduction. And that looks normal, but isn't is like, I don't know a better description, because you read this stuff and it's almost, you get like your brain waves get adjusted to this frequency. Introduction by Francis Ford Coppola. That's a pretty good start.
Yeah, it speaks to a lot of things, man. It speaks to how Jim Woodring's work transcends beyond the direct market comic shop, which I laugh. But these comics came out in a place where that was the distribution back. That's where you had to go to get these comics. And somehow Francis Ford Coppola gets a hold of it. Now, Francis Ford Coppola was hip. Like, I forget where I saw it, like very recently, this past week. It was footage from San Diego Comic-Con before Dracula, where Francis Ford Coppola was like walking around, checking things out when it was much smaller. So he's hip. Maybe he was there under the guise of like looking for stuff to license or something. Who knows? But he knows comics in some cursory way. Yeah,
and you mentioned Dracula. Of course, there's that famous story of him sitting in a screening room with Mike Mignola watching the movie. So, pretty good pedigree when it comes to Coppola's connection to Cartoonist and comics. And what an endorsement! Like I would have known Mignola at this time, but not Woodring. This was new to me. So, in a way, it's like an easy connection. It's almost, he vetted him for me.
Right.
Kind of a cool line here. The Frank book is one man's puzzling gift to a puzzling world. Again, I think that's a really good description. And, linger on this page to just admire the ink line and his facility with ink. It blows my mind.
It's painstaking stuff. Like, if I remember correctly, on the documentary, they show him putting down some of these ink lines. And what looks to be like one kind of like stroke where there's variance in the line of just like pushing and pulling. I don't think it's exactly that. I think it's a lot of toil goes into each one of those
that makes
lines.
Sense.
And it's a very rigorous
If
process.
I'm not mistaken, this first story, Frank and the River, goes back to Tundra Publishing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a cool bit of history that goes with this character and with Woodring as well.
When those guys, like every Tundra book you see, I give those guys respect for actually making good on their promises to Kevin Eastman. It's the ones that it's the unspoken guys who are like, man, you had such a great opportunity and you squandered it. You have the opportunity that every cartoonist dreams of.
You had this opportunity.
Yeah.
You know, Woodring is a great example of somebody that took that opportunity and made something spectacular. I'm always impressed by the stuff that it's like a decade later or 20 years later. It's still exciting. It's still new. It's still being produced in beautiful editions. Like, that's really taking advantage of what you have there. Ed, you mentioned this coming out in the direct market to start with. Pre-internet, like, it's impossible to think about trying to sell this kind of unique comic with that limited marketplace. Right. How hard would it be to get the word out? I mean, this was a time when most indie comics were black and white, so even if you got someone to cover you, this is probably going to be reproduced poorly in black and white. Like, stores wouldn't even order indie, you know, beyond Marvel, DC in many cases. Such a tough market for something like this, and, you know, again, 300 plus pages of this that he persevered through that direct market. This is 03, so this is early days of like, okay, now we can at least sell it online, we can show it online, you know, show off the beautiful colors and things. Most of this book was created without that tool as a way to build an audience and to connect a unique voice to that audience.
That early gen of Fantagraphics creators, it's an amazing sacrifice that they made for us. Whenever I meet these guys, like, I don't let them forget that, you know, I have it easy compared to what they dealt with in a day where it's like, you might sell on a good month, you might sell 10,000 and it's a $3 comic and you get, you know, your 8% royalty or something like that. Look at this rigor. Like this ain't a monthly comic.
That's what I was going to say. You're then you go and spend your 6 months making another issue.
Yeah, like, so it's like it was an amazing, selfless act that they've given to the medium of comics. That is just an incredible. We're super lucky, man. Yeah,
for sure. One of the elements of Frank is the cartoon language. I think of like Kaz and Underworld. There's several of these cartoonists that they seem to deal with like the iconography of cartoons and what that is. And, you know, Frank is a great example of it. All these characters feel this way. And that's part of that looks normal but isn't. Mm-hmm. It feels like this is a cartoon world. I can understand this. They're doing logical things. You can really read their actions until you start like actually reading this and seeing like these actions don't make sense. Even though I can follow what they're doing, there's not an obvious counterpoint to like my reality whenever I read this. And it's mind-bending in the truest sense of that phrase.
It's like... You say mind-bending, and the word that was in my mind is compelling, like, to the true sense of that phrase. Like I need to know, I'm along for the ride. Jim, you have me, you know, by the lapels. I'm buying everything you're selling. Give it to me. Bring it on. You know, like, that's the spirit that you read a Frank comic in.
Yeah, for sure. Almost shades of Mickey Mouse in your silhouette here.
This fucking character.
Yes, Man-Hog. And sometimes Gentleman Hog.
Jesus H. Christ.
This character is probably the almost the equal of Frank for how we see him, because sometimes he's sympathetic, but he's also horrific. You never really like him or cheer for him. He's gross, but he's also put through the ringer over and over. Like, it's such a bizarre character. He feels like he's an archetype of some sort, but then doesn't line up anywhere.
Don't read this before bed. Don't read this before you take maybe a melatonin.
Yes.
Or so, because you're not going to read about this little guy have just a poppy little character. It's the Man-Hog that shows up in your dreams.
Yes. If he shows up, wake up as soon as you can. Yeah. Pinch yourself when you encounter Man-Hog. Even the name is absurd.
Yeah.
This character is disturbing to me as well. It's like that man on the moon face. Yeah, I don't like him at all. There's lots of openings, like several of these stories, you know, you can see these kind of openings, but there are a lot of characters going through doorways, portals, pipes, and coming out in different dynamic worlds, you know, where they might be in control. Whenever they come through that opening, now they're being chased, or they're being, you know, somehow having their roles flipped around. It's incredible. And you never forget how good Woodring is graphically.
Never.
Every panel is spectacular.
Like this. Like, all right, let's. You've seen me do the straight lines to kind of delineate skyline. Let's go 3D with it.
Yeah. This part just blew me away. I bought this at Mocha, and I can remember sitting down and reading it. Like, it's one of those distinct memories I have of reading this book where it was like a couple of hours of my time and just really felt like I was on drugs or, something changed after reading this. And it is his drawing. Like, I don't know what else, some of it is the action of these characters, but a lot of it is just this drawing. Your eyes are almost kind of fuzzy or something the longer you stare at this. And you can see these portals, dreaming of portals while he's looking through other openings. There are a lot of these like techno-organic character things that populate. This almost looks like something where you're like steeping tea. It's like
right.
the hot water. Just hallucinatory visuals. The book design itself, I think they do a really good job with mashing up these stories. And I don't know if they're reprinted in some kind of chronological order or not, but you go back and forth between these black and white kind of intense pieces and the color pieces. There's several color sections throughout the book.
Wow.
It's just wild.
Wow.
Yeah, wow is the right word for this stuff. I was so impressed because I kind of knew of Jim Woodring before I got hold of this book, but I had never really sat down and read a lot. And whenever I did, it's like he has that facility that you would see in someone like a Dan Clowes with very precise lines.
Oh, definitely. Like that 90s generation of Fanta cartoonists, it was precision was in the air. Like did that kind of meticulous craft of comic book making. That was the staple of the brand.
Yeah. This is a great character from behind. It's almost like a human has entered Frank's world.
That's Jim Woodring.
Until he turns around, and then it's, of course, some sort of disturbing anomaly. Can't have these happy characters. And you see Munhall jumping from one container to another. Just bizarre. There are these prison cells. There's a lot of stuff that has to do with characters and where they live and in the spaces that they crawl through these little spaces. Like, you see this tiny little opening. You'll see this again in future stories, and it'll be Frank crawling through these openings that if you have any claustrophobia in you, it's hard to even look at the pictures. But it's entering these worlds, right? Like you see these openings that are coming out, and what are these characters made of? The characters morph into different shapes and different characters.
Some of the line art, and I just made this connection looking at some of these pieces, man. Like the chest on that devil character. It's a technique that Will Elder kind of brought to comics with Goodman Beaver, with the tapered line kind of thing. I mean, obviously, like there were etchings and stuff in the past, but talking comics, like Elder is a guy who brought these kind of tapered lines into the medium.
That's an interesting connection, yeah. And based on his cartoon language, I assume that he's looking at stuff like Elder, like any kind of comics and cartoon history, I would assume he's versed in. There are several great, we could point out his illustration ability on virtually every page, but there'll be things like this where characters in water, a lot of these motifs repeat throughout these stories, which I think comes from, using dream imagery, using kind of like defining your own world of characters. But his ability to draw like underwater and have a character breaking through part of it, just phenomenal.
Yeah, it's that thing where he created a language, and we're able, with 300 pages of material, we're able to see how he approaches all sorts of stuff, like using this vernacular that he created. Like, so that underwater piece is a really good example.
This Moonface character shows up with this device, starts cranking on it, and just turns Frank's head into like something else. That happens a lot. Having cartoon characters means that you can morph them and blow them up and expand them and do a lot of those things. And Woodring definitely does that. And gosh, I keep thinking, okay, good spot to end.
Yeah.
But virtually every page that you turn, you're going to find more inventiveness. And it stays true, if you happen to come across one of Woodring's graphic novels, more recent graphic novels, that's a good place to start. If you're at home watching
Whatever
this
you
and
can
you're
get.
unfamiliar with him, this quality permeates all of his work.
Yeah, just grab something.
You can see cutting back now to another color section. Like I said, there's probably 3 or 4 of these color sections throughout this particular book, but even, weird skulls that are anthropomorphized into this world. Everything fits in it too. I remember hearing someone describe Kim Deitch's cartooning where it's like he could draw a chair and it's in his world.
Yeah, oh, totally.
And I mean, this is the extreme version of it. Look at that fish.
That's the other thing that I put on that era of the Fantagraphics cartoonists. Like, they all had a very unique voice. It's so odd to think about, like, how there were so many fewer venues for independent cartooning, at the time when this stuff was originally coming out. And, like, the people that Fantagraphics got were, like, all, like, heavy hitters, man.
Yeah, I can't even think of other cartooning that looks like this.
Not at all. I mean, it's completely his own thing. Going through enough of Woodring comics, I really want to know what the heck he did at Ruby Spears. Like, I want to know how his hand was applied. And that's when we talk that jobber talk and all this kind of stuff. It's like, he could have just stayed having a job and we would have been robbed of this.
It's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. It's a different world if this isn't in it.
Totally.
Because somebody else isn't filling in this gap. This just doesn't exist if Woodring doesn't do it.
And that's what I was speaking about at the beginning, where it's just like, when you have these people that have this, like, very unique point of view, and they also have such a high level of craft, when they want to, like, participate in comics and make comics, it's a beautiful thing to start. And man, you really want them to prosper. Like, everybody, go out, buy some Jim Woodring comics today.
Yeah, reward this generosity.
Yes.
Yeah, it's awesome. I want to point out this story we're looking at, it's dated 1993. We cover a lot of comics from that era. This is Image Year One. It's speculator boom at the height. So, you could stumble into a comic book store at this time looking for a Youngblood issue and find this.
I remember seeing these as a kid, fully dismissing them for several reasons. One, there's no words in it, man. So what? I'm going to read this in 3 seconds and pay $5 for this? Like, that's a whole week's worth of lunch money. Two, when I'm looking at Stephen Platt's Youngblood, it's a little weak, man. This is like a little cartoon dude.
Where are the double lit shell casings?
Yeah. Like, what is this? Like now I'm reading Looney Tunes comics. So it would have been impossible for me to even give this a shot back then. But I remember seeing it.
Yeah, it's so peculiar. A giant hammer that has an eye on the side of it.
A lot of eyes.
These comics, Woodring's work is definitely informed by hallucination and dream type imagery. And you watch the documentary or you read interviews with him and you'll hear him talk about it. Like, that's not secretive stuff. But if you're watching this at home and you're wondering what these comics are, that's a big chunk of it too. There's certainly a long lineage of literature that comes out of dreams and subconscious. That's what this would fit into from a narrative standpoint.
In a great application of it, because
yes.
I think we might be on the record on the channel previously, and we certainly had these conversations off camera where it's like the lowest form of conversation is you telling me what your dream was last night, and there are comics like that where it's just like these dream comics, and if you want to put me to sleep, like, you'll show me your dream comic. But there are good ones. There's like, Roaring Ricks is really sick, and this is a great application of, like, using the good stuff that comes from your imagination and your dreams and applying it in a way that's not just self-serving and masturbation.
Yeah. Ed, I'm going to leave it at this point. We've come to the end of this particular story. We could go through this whole book, but I think we'd start repeating ourselves at some point. Mostly, I just thought this was a chance to show off a guy who just incredible level of skill and inventiveness and comics that we haven't looked at before because we haven't looked at Frank before.
Right.
These comics aren't like any other comics. So something a little bit different, but certainly of the high quality and the unique vision that I love in comics. This has it in spades.
Fantastic, man. I feel juiced up even just looking at that. Everybody go out and get some Jim Woodring comics.
It is one of those books that makes me want to draw.
Totally.
Like, I look at his ink work and it's like, yes, I gotta go.
Kayfabers, like, follow, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit the bell. We'll notify you when new vids are available. Jimmy, what's out there in the wild?
Join me on Patreon at patreon.com/JimRugg, where you can find my drawings, my original art, my out-of-print zines and mini comics, hard to find work of that sort, as well as what I'm going to be working on in the near future. That'll be your preview area. So patreon.com/JimRugg.
Fantagraphics is the publisher of the bulk of these Jim Woodring comics, and they are the publisher of my comics project, Red Room, that's going to start coming out on a monthly basis in May 2021. There's going to be at least 13 issues of that thing, including the free Comic Book Day comics. So stay tuned to the channel for news on all of that stuff. Hit the links in my link tree. You could pre-order the comic through Fantagraphics. You could hit my Patreon up, patreon.com/EdPiskor. You could read the comics ahead of time before they hit the print edition. And there's 3 issues up there right now.
These will look nice on your shelf together, Frank and Red Room. You can subscribe to the Cartoonist Kayfabe e-newsletter at the links below this video to keep up with everything that's coming up and coming out this year. You can also pick up Cartoonist Kayfabe t-shirts and merchandise at the links below this video.
Jimmy, give him one more set of marching orders, man. We're going to be on our way.
Read more comics.
Jim Woodring comics specifically.